The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome to the bonus show. There has been a surge of immigrants coming to the United States-Mexico border. And this is interesting for political reasons, because for so long, Donald Trump has been touting the success of his policy by talking about how border crossings are at record lows, which, of course, doesn't really justify the need for a wall. On the other hand, we also have Donald Trump talking about a crisis at the border as a justification for the U.S.-Mexico border wall. And of course, the truth is that the numbers ebb and flow, that in February, the U.S. Border Patrol apprehended more than 66,000 migrants. That is the highest total for a single month in also a decade. The majority were migrant families or children traveling alone, or at least without a parent, sometimes with other children or young people or people who are not their family. Many of the migrants say that they're fleeing criminal gangs and poverty in Central America to seek asylum in the United States. CBP Commissioner Kevin McAleenan says that this is clearly both a border security and humanitarian crisis. So the politics of this become very complex for Donald Trump, Pat, because on the other hand, yes, this helps his justification for needing a border wall now. On the other hand, he's been touting record low numbers as evidence of his successful policy. They simply can't both be true simultaneously.
Yeah, and I also wonder if an increase in border crossings that happens after Trump declared the national emergency helps his case at all. Like, I think the courts will weigh at the time that he declared the national emergency where border crossings were at and determine whether it is or is not a national crisis based on that alone. But that's just my 2 cents on it. I don't know for sure.
The other important thing to consider is that, listen, there's so many, you can't really understand this without digging into the details. One such detail is that for, in greater and greater proportion, Mexico is not the source country for the people that are attempting to come over, but it's merely a conduit. People are coming north from further south in Central and South America. And they are coming through Mexico by virtue of geography, not by virtue of being from Mexico. That's one interesting dynamic that should be considered. Number two, the demographics of the people coming over have shifted drastically over the last 20 years. It used to be overwhelmingly single men actually from Mexico, like not just coming physically from Mexico, but Mexican men who were coming to the United States, mostly looking for work in order to be able to send money back to their families in Mexico. Now it is more and more families, as I mentioned, and children who are seeking asylum, and they are coming through Mexico, but from other countries. The situation in Honduras is atrocious. The situation in Nicaragua is abysmal. Guatemala. I mean, there are a lot of places right now that are really not doing well. And I think that it would be unfair, not unfair, it would be ignorant, Pat, to evaluate what policy should be when it's mostly Mexican men coming versus when it is more and more families and children coming, merely because their objectives are different. The reasons that they're here are different. Doesn't make it any more or less legal to physically cross the border without a visa or in illegal means. But we should consider that as we analyze what our policy should be.
And even if Trump does build a beautiful wall across the entire southern border, we're still going to have asylum seekers. That's still going to be perfectly legal. We've signed on to international treaties saying that people can come here and seek asylum. Now, maybe they'll try to keep them at a penitentiary rather than letting them go and come back for immigration court. I don't know if the Trump administration will be able to change that policy. I don't know if they have the resources to do so. But you're not going to solve an issue like that. And also, Trump makes it seem as though the videos that he's seen of the caravan is just packed entirely with men, big, strong men coming over the border. No, I mean, the numbers suggest otherwise, that it's mostly women and children seeking asylum.
Yeah, the numbers suggest otherwise. And also, he's made assertions about it's Middle Eastern men, implying that they are terrorists who have gone to South America, Central America, to then come up through Mexico, which has also not been backed by any actual data or evidence. Not that Trump cares, but on the program, we try to actually pay attention to that. Hey, this is something I think a lot of people in our audience may not be aware of. The Colorado baker who was embroiled in the controversy over baking a wedding cake for a same-sex wedding, which ultimately went all the way up to the Supreme Court and was partially upheld on religious grounds. He has been simultaneously involved in another incident where he refused to bake a cake celebrating a gender transition for a transgender individual. And you now have the Colorado Attorney General, Phil Weiser, as well as attorneys representing the baker, Jack Phillips, saying they are agreeing to end the legal actions around that, including a federal lawsuit that Phillips filed, accusing the state of waging a crusade to crush him by pursuing civil rights complaints over his refusal to bake a gender transition cake. His attorneys say that this is a victory for him. Most other people are saying this is just everybody agreeing that there's no point in continuing to fight this and we're just going to end legal claims. How bad are things going for you, Pat, if what you are known for is refusing to bake cakes for people on the basis of their LGBT membership, aside from whether it's on religious grounds or moral grounds or whatever, supposed scientific grounds? This just seems like the most depressing existence to me.
Well, I guess so, but to him, he goes down as a martyr, someone who fought for religious freedom, someone who's going to be praised by the religious community, and I think that's going to be his life story. He becomes a polarizing figure, but I'm sure he does get a lot of support behind him. This case in particular, though, it kind of rubs me the wrong way because the transgender individual who made the request to have a cake baked for them did so on the same day that it was revealed that the Supreme Court was going to be taking up the gay wedding cake case. So it's like she is trying to make a political point about it. And I don't know, I'd rather see the person go in genuinely wanting to have a cake, not try to get on the news or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, listen, on all sides, I'm just sick of the politics around this, but I still go back to just bake the cake. Not every cake has to be a political statement. Not every cake has to be a religious statement. Just be decent to people and bake the cake that they want. In this case, it was going to be a cake that was, I guess, blue on the outside, but pink on the inside when you cut into it, in order to celebrate the transition from male to female. And, I understand what you're saying, Pat, about this is a person who feels as though they're fighting for what's right, et cetera, and so on. But aren't they going to end up sort of like that county clerk from Kentucky who refused to marry a gay couple? I think her name was Kim Davis. She already, I mean, it's like at the time, people were saying what you're saying, which is she is going to be remembered for this. She did the moral thing. She wasn't bullied, blah, blah, blah. Gay marriage is just clearly legal at this point, undisputably in every state, or just marriage. Everybody can get married, as I call it. And who even remembers Kim Davis? Yeah,
maybe he'll be seen as a hero for the next 10, 20 years, Jack Phillips. But eventually his supporters will die out. And, more and more people are becoming more inclusive when it comes to LGBT issues. So that will likely happen. I agree with you there.
Let's talk about Senator Rand Paul. Senator Rand Paul is starting up his anti-vaccine stuff. He criticized in a Senate hearing yesterday the idea that parents should be required to vaccinate their children. He promoted the idea that vaccines are dangerous during a Senate Health Committee hearing. He argued that government-mandated vaccines limit individual liberties. He regularly invokes this anti-vaccine sentiment. He also said that he's skeptical of the benefits of vaccinating children, which, of course, is a strange position for a doctor to take. And this is particularly also strange in the context that the World Health Organization has identified not vaccines, but anti-vaccine sentiment as one of the 10 biggest global health threats of 2019. I find the argument about mandatory vaccination, Pat, to be somewhat of a straw man fallacy. And I'm not suggesting that there is never going to be a debate over whether a government is or should force people to be vaccinated. But what we're actually talking about right now are requirements from public schools for children to be vaccinated to attend, which of course they aren't mandated to do.
Yeah, and so I think that argument, I think Rand Paul fails to make the freedom argument on that grounds, because when you decide to put your children in public schools, you're sacrificing some of your freedom to do so, and you have the alternative to put them in a private school or to homeschool them. So I don't think the freedom argument stands up there. But if eventually we get to a point where we realize we would be safer and healthier as a society if we mandated vaccines, this is a conversation that I think could come up in the future.
The other fallacious argument that always comes up is Rand Paul mentioned at some point during his speech at the Senate Health Committee. I'm paraphrasing, but he said, even the medical community admits that sometimes vaccines cause harm when there are adverse side effects. That's not really a good argument against vaccines. I mean, almost any medical procedure has some degree of risk. You don't lobby to eliminate that medical procedure as a result. And again, the vaccines are not mandatory. They are simply required if you want to attend public schools. Would we say that because sometimes colonoscopies have complications and adverse reactions, that we shouldn't be doing them as preventative measures that for the most part have a positive impact on people's health? And that seems to be an argument that is made frequently with vaccines, because sometimes there are bad reactions. Vaccines in general, or at the conceptual level, at a base level, are harmful, and therefore we should do away with them. It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I think that he doesn't necessarily believe that himself, but he wants to give a wink and a nod to the anti-vaxxer community. I don't know what the political makeup of that movement is. Like, anti-vaxxers, are they largely liberal or conservative or libertarian? But my guess would be that there's a big libertarian streak among anti-vaxxers, and he's trying to appeal to them.
Yeah, I mean, so there's right-wing anti-vaxxers who are distrustful of government, and then there are left-wing anti-vaxxers who are distrustful of pharmaceutical companies, and then it's sort of an alliance that has that libertarian streak running through it. But Rand Paul, not the first time he's done stuff like this. I'm sure not the last time that he will say this type of stuff. I know that there's a small fraction of our audience that is part of the anti-vax community, and that every time I talk about it, they get mad at me and they email me. But I'm going to keep talking about it because the anti-vax sentiment is a huge health threat. And therefore, it's going to be a continued topic of conversation on the show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.